Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name, do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend.
That I will support and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
Welcome to Block 4 of the Discovery Funnel. We're going to discuss the different industries. Really, this is who you're going to go work for, who you're going to go work with, the different personality traits and things that come out of that, because there's a massive difference inside of each industry on these different components that we're going to go through. So in recapping the journey we've been on so far, we started off with why. What's going on inside, outside, all the rest of you, and the initiative or the drive on what you want to do.
Defining the most important aspect of this journey, which is you yourself.
You yourself.
For sure.
After that was the what, right? What are the functions and the roles that you could do, those different archetypes and career journeys, being the partner, CEO, and partner in those different aspects. And so now, as you think of being an operator, as you think of being a consultant, or as you think of being an investor advisor in the primary colors, where or who do you do that with? And so we're break this portion down, these different categories that are all different ways to look at the same thing into three spaces. We have industry, we have ownership, and also we have size. And so Billy and I are going to work through these topics here to provide you a means of like a framework. And at the end of the day, we will not have the answers in this because there's such a vast rainbow of opportunities here in this space. You're going to have to do a lot of research, but we do want to give you enough to set you in the right directions, and so you can think to yourself, I think I might like that.
And the big piece that we want to drive forward immediately is that first layer of what you might want to do. You get really comfortable with, oh yeah, I want to do that role. Now the overlay on top of that, which is who you do that role for, I'm just going to tell you right up front, if you do that role in company A can be and look vastly different than company B. And that's really what we're going to try to get across to you today, because that was like a big learning curve for me, because once I had settled on consulting, then I found out that just because you're a consultant doesn't mean that you're going to be the same consultant in every single company. So I was just like, what? And so hopefully we can avoid that moment for you for this particular portion of the discovery funnel.
Billy, describe the spectrum, right?
A really good story that I'll share to describe just a slight nuance in spectrum. So I was interviewing for jobs, shocker. And I had really narrowed down, this is when I had narrowed down to consulting, and I was looking at a couple of primary places. Deloitte, which was one of those mid-tier, big four consulting firms. I was looking at McKinsey, which is one of your big three strategy firms. And then I was looking at Amazon Web Services, which again,
massive
tech company, specific boutique professional services consulting group. But all of them were security consultants for the cloud. Same role. And I talked to my recruiter for all of them, and the McKinsey recruiter gets back to me and he's like, hey, make sure that you wear a suit and it's this color and it's not crazy. And I was like, okay. And then the Deloitte guy was like, make sure you wear a button-down shirt and it's not crazy. And then the AWS guy was like, I've seen people wear hoodies and it's totally fine. So I interviewed with AWS.
Yeah.
And that story really goes to show, even within consulting, even within cloud security consulting, there's a wide range of cultures and things to expect. And a great example is I've worked in defense and I've worked in IT. In AWS, in Google, in Microsoft, you're going to see these crazy campuses with these amazing amenities and everyone's wearing the company t-shirt and it's very chill. It's a very chill vibe, very Silicon Valley vibe for sure. On the defense side, much more standard, corporate, structured, suit, tie.
They have characteristics. So diving into industries, there are lots of industries. I think a great recommendation is to go to Google and look at top 25 industries in the US. And some of these terms you'll hear are aerospace and military industrial complex, or automotive, chemicals. And so this ranges, right? The big two
lot.
pillars of the types of industries fall underneath B2B and B2C. So B2B stands for business to business. And so these are organizations that sell from a business to a business. And the last one, all the brands that you're probably familiar with, are the B2C, from business to the consumer. These are things that you buy personally at stores, Amazon, websites, gifts. You are the consumer. If you buy something, that's the B2C. So those are the two primary pillars of all the companies that are out there. Who are they selling their goods and services to? Inside of that, then, we have this massive spectrum of industries. As you think of those, the personality traits,
Vastly
in a sense,
different.
change.
Yes.
So focusing on the industry aspect is that stereotypically software companies are more, you could say, like liberal in culture, breaking barriers and deciding that we're going to have free coffee and yoga sessions. Stereotypical things that you hear about the big software companies. On the other end, the more conservative cultural end, not political, is the government. And things that are closer to the government is the status quo, very precise on the greetings and how you move through the system. The software side, move fast and break things. The other side is don't step on the grass. So this is the spectrum that these industries fit in. Chemicals, logistics, financial services.
There's a ton.
There's a lot of them. And so what we want to talk about here in this industry aspect, there's a massive distribution of industry. Each of those do have characteristics that connect all of them. So inside of, let's go with aerospace and defense. So many of the prior veterans or current service members
Probably
are
works
listening
with
to,
at
like,
least one
they
of them.
know, you guys have seen the materials that we use. There are startups that are building those, right? So some of the advanced units are using all sorts of like crazy new tech, and that's coming from a company that's in startup mode, that's wearing the t-shirts in a cultural sense, whereas the F-35 coming from Lockheed Martin is highly process oriented and much more going to be on that conservative military government-esque side of things. So
Definitely.
inside of the industry, there's a massive separation on what type of, like, how that company works.
Yeah. And while certain industries can definitely have certain monolithic style aspects to them, that's definitely not always the case. And make sure that you do research on companies that you are interested in. So once you picked an industry, make sure you're diving into that specific company, because the culture can change.
And it really matters to get it right. I interviewed with Amazon, which went to offer, which is sweet. It's not the role I decided to go with. And the gentleman before me in the interview, and this was for an operations role inside of one of the warehouses. So it was making sure everyone's there and filling boxes and sending them off. The gentleman that went before me was wearing a suit. And I did my research and I talked to Amazonians, because that's what they call themselves, to wear a t-shirt. And I felt that it was so wrong wearing a t-shirt to this interview, but I went after him and I go into the office and the guy goes, "Oh, thank goodness. You read about our values. Now let's talk about it." And I was already like a huge leg up on understanding those cultural norms inside an industry that in different warehouses could be very rigid. And there is much more fluid as far as that culture piece. So do the research, take the time to read articles about them. Read Google articles, read newspaper articles.
Radical collaboration. Talk to people, which we'll get into later in the course, but this is a great way to get the bead on company culture for sure, especially in startups.
So industries have characteristics that also vary. So next is the size of the company. I know this was important in Billy's decision for his career. I had experience in a big company and a small that we'll also dive into, but the size of a company. And so this is a simple scale of big, medium, and small. Now, the words that they use in industry are enterprise level. It's big, huge,
massive.
Fortune 100, Fortune 500 enterprise. And different companies have different benchmarks on where the enterprise level begins. It's either tied to revenue or it's tied to employee count. Enterprise. The medium-sized companies are called commercial. Commercial size. Again, every organization separates these a little bit differently. And the last is the small, which is a SMB, small and medium business. And that's the very small bottom end of this spectrum.
Would you classify SMBs and startups differently, or are startups part of the SMB category.
They're starting the SMB category. The reason we want to pull startup out of that is because it has high growth potential. Every company wants high growth, but I would say that SMBs are just this category of company with lower revenue and lower personnel count, because what matters and why you make that separation is because of these characteristic traits on being employed there. But then also, it's indicative of what are their needs? What are they looking to buy? What are they looking to sell? What are they trying to do? Do they need funding? Do they need this certain type of system that a B2B company would use it to target those accounts? There's different sales cycles, there are different life cycles. And so it's a way to segment the market, because it does run from the biggest to the smallest. And so we segment it, which then we can draw these characteristics out of them. Let's go through this. So Billy, give me some aspects of like big company. What are some few highs about a big company, and then we'll go a few lows.
Honestly, for most big companies, it's very similar to working in a military organization. There is a ton of process. There is a ton of structure.
Yeah, you want this, go to that person, follow that process, submit that.
Exactly. You're most likely going to walk into a situation where things have already been taken care of. There's not a lot of definition. You don't have a lot of chances to define your space. And also, you're probably going to experience like you're going to do a role that has a defined task, most likely, and you're not going to branch out from that because they already have people to do the other stuff. So those are some of the ones we'll really talk about later in the section. We do how does this affect you? We'll talk about more about how these things might factor in, but those are some of the big ones that I think are worth bringing up right now.
Big ones, a lot of infrastructure. Medium, most often less infrastructure. Do more roles with less. And on the small side, where I am today in a startup mode, is low infrastructure.
You're figuring it out.
I'm not going to say no infrastructure, but it's low infrastructure. And as you think of, we'll talk about those other people. Big, medium, small, enterprise, commercial, SMB. And so it's important to know what your company is and the ones you're interested in, and to identify what aligns with your needs and wants and how that matches with these companies. So that's the second piece. As we move into the third is now ownership. How is the company owned and funded? This is another way to slice and dice these companies and opportunities, is their ownership model. This breaks down into two primary categories, and then we'll go into a few sub on one of those categories. So we have publicly traded, so a public company. These are ones that are listed on the public markets that you can go buy a stock in as a retail trader, and you can look at all the financials of them. You can see how much the C-suite makes. You can see how much profit they had, how much their revenue was, their operating losses, who's involved, what's going on. Public companies. And then there's private companies. Private companies have a few different categories. The larger public companies, it's not necessarily indicative of ownership, how large they are, but we have private equity, which is private equity owns the company, and then they hire leaders to then go grow the organization. What private equity is trying to do is to grow the company and sell it for a profit and make some money, all right? They have a thesis where private equity says, we know how to do this, and we're going to go do it well. We get into some traits there. Venture capital is usually startup, and they're throwing some money into a lot of places. And the last is privately owned. And privately owned means that a family or individual single person own the company and have complete control of that company. And so that means that those profits of the company
straight to the family
could go wherever they want. It could go back into the company. It can go into future investment. It can go into their pool. It can wherever they want because they own it. And those are some different ways to slice up these companies. And so publicly traded companies have advantages around stock that can be granted. Privately owned companies have equity that they can grant, but most often that's held just for very high up leaders. And the last one, in private, it's owned by the family or by the individual, and what they want to do, they get to do. And so those are some ways, to slice these up and have some insight into exploring what that means for you, exploring the things that you might like about them, the adventure of some, the status quo of the others, and what is comfortable for you and what you need.